Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Danny Lay. I'm a librarian here at the Santa Clara City Library. And thank you for joining us for this amazing talk with Bonafide Rojas. I'm going to start off with a little bio before we begin, and then we're going to get into it. Bonafide Rojas is the author of Notes on the Return to the Island, published in 2017, Concourse Press, Renovatio, When the City Sleeps, and Pelo Bueno, A Day in the Life of a Nuyorican Poet. He has appeared on Def Poetry Jam Season 4 and Splitting Ink. He has been published in numerous anthologies and journals and is the bandleader of the Mona Passage, performing internationally at various venues, institutions, and stages. Welcome, the world-renowned Bonafide Rojas. What's up, my brother?
Hi, how you doing? Welcome. Hello from the East Coast, from New York City.
I know it's like 4 p.m. right now, so
Yeah.
the sun is shining. It's beautiful. Your hair is looking luxurious.
I completely washed my hair for you today.
I'm grateful for that. So I'm surprised that I haven't done it for you, but you guys only know that. I'll do it later. Well, anyways, before we get into it, how have you been doing throughout this pandemic? How's your health, your soul, your family? How's New York City?
New York took a beating, right? New York was epicenter for a few months. We're a lot better now, right? We flattened the curve. Our percentage is less than a point. In New York City is about anywhere between 7 to 8 million people. And we're getting really low numbers of new cases, of deaths. So I'm really enthusiastic about that. My immediate family, they've been really, really good. Extended family and friends, there's a couple of deaths that have been there, which have affected me, but it's something that, it's a process, right? And what I try to do for my friends who have lost loved ones, I just try to be there, be a resource and be a sounding pole. And for someone who's lost, relatives and things like that, just be there for them. In terms of me per se, I'm in the middle of recording a record still, right? So myself and Yabe, the singer from the Mona Passage, we've been finishing the record up, and we're thinking probably November, December, right? And 2020 in a blast with a record out, which is it's a pandemic recording, but it's been like for everyone, it's an overwhelming sense of loneliness at certain points. Other times it's good to be in your loneliness and figure out what works and what doesn't work. But I'm still grateful. I'm still grateful for everything. I'm still having my health and being able to just still get up and go. Right.
Yeah, I feel you on that. And I'm grateful to hear that. You're becoming creative. You have stuff in the pipeline. And that drive for speaking your voice and truth is still there. Of course, we don't want it to go away, or for anybody as well. But it's been a tough year. I can't believe we're gonna be in the last quarter, finishing it up. I remember I was in Hawaii in February, and right before it jump started, and now I'm thinking about what next year looks like and how we proceed as working in libraries, how we proceed to continue to serve the community. But we're grateful to writers like yourself who fill our shelves and our spirits up with your creativity. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
So, just to, frame it with those who are tuning in who probably don't know about you and know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself, because you're very much a multifaceted person. Pretty much, also what has inspired you to become a writer, a poet, and speak the way you do, as well as project it in your music.
So I've been a poet for 25 years, about 24, 25, depends.
What?
Yeah, I started really young. I started, as a teenager here in New York. And it was one of the first things that I think I took really seriously. Right, the first thing I took seriously is probably graffiti, but that's a whole different conversation. But in terms of like expressing myself through writing, I was like 17, and I absorbed a lot. I read a lot in that time period. I think the first year I wrote poetry, I think I read like 50 books of poetry. Like
Wow.
I dived in really hard. I think I had dropped out of high school, and then I applied to college. I had got my GED, and I was still writing. But for me, it was still just like, well, I need to do this, right? Like I need to do this because this is what's expected of me. But in my head, I was like, well, this isn't going to change what I want to do. Because I just want to be a writer. I want to be a poet. And I had some really early successes, which I think also made me feel comfortable, right? Early successes. When you're a young artist, early successes and early support, I think, go a long way. I always tell people about like the catalyst that I have, right, in this life of me presenting a poem to the person that inspired me to write. And
Mm.
he was a younger man. He was like 15 and I was like 17. And I always tell people that if he would have clowned me for being, for being a biter, you'd have been like, I don't want to do this ever again. Because people are ruthless, right? They're ruthless, and sometimes people don't understand what repercussions can be. But he was really supportive, and we definitely we're still friends. But I tell people all this from that moment, yeah, like I was like, okay, good, cool, because everyone's a poser in the beginning. But just
Yeah.
how long are you going to stay in that field to like cement your place in things and build that foundation? So that's been there for a really long time, and everything that I do, I tell people, has always been an extension from poetry, regardless of what medium it is. It's always in that. Now, being a musician was something I wanted to do before, but growing up in the Bronx here in New York, music isn't the most accessible thing, right?
Right.
Music programs in New York, I think, pretty much got wiped out in the 80s, which is also the advent of why hip hop is the way it is.
Mm.
Um, but like I've been a music lover since I was like 12, like like really like diving into like really big rock bands and really big hip hop groups, and like really understanding like, wow, I really enjoy this. And then at 14, 15, I'm like, oh wait, who's playing drums on this and who's doing this? And then by the time I got to 17, I'm listening to like really like left field stuff and like reading these like weird books, and everyone's like, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from the Bronx. And they're like what? And of course people laugh at you. You're like, it's cool. Even though right now, when I see younger generations, they don't have those kind of divisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though you hope they listen to everything because of their accessibility to the information and the internet. But back then I had to like either steal music or get it from somebody, and it was normally I used to steal it. So not from a library though. I was really particular about libraries.
There's rules to this, right?
They are one of the truest forms of socialism. So I was like, you stay away from libraries. But yeah, so I started playing guitar. I think I was like 20. I started playing, and then when I moved to Chicago, that's when I really started like really playing it more often. One of the worst things is me selling my first Stratocaster at a pawn shop, right by Wicker Park. To this day, I'm like, I should have kept that guitar. I think the guy even stopped me. Like, you sure you want to do this? You can just pawn it and come pick it up later. I was like, no, I need money now. And that was never gonna happen again. And yeah, so then when I moved back to New York, which was about like '05, like I was pretty much like set. Like the band had been created, and like I had all these like demos and music and stuff, and we started playing around then. And what most people don't know is that like I never wanted to be like the singer in the band. I just wanted to be the guitar player and write the music. So whether ebbs and flows and hiatuses and the way bands are, you look at it from like a standpoint of, well, how does that road look, and are you going to have the same musicians the whole time? And you don't, right? Very few bands ever have the same musicians all the way through. So with every pitfall, I kind of take a hiatus, go back to poetry. But I think the last few years, especially with Yabe joining the band, I've just felt like, no, it's fine. We can keep going, whether we have a drummer or not, whether we have a bass player or not. We're just going to keep doing. I've definitely reached a place where I'm really completely comfortable with creating music on my own and then just giving it to him, and he writes the lyrics, and he writes it and he finds the melody. There's these really, really important things that I can't always find so easily. But when he does it, like, it really creates something that I'm like, okay, this is really good. And it's completely different than how I am. Like if I put out a bunch of solo records, they're always going to be kind of like maybe too aggressive or too loud or whatever. But with the Moon of Passive songs, they are much more pleasing, I think. Like we asked a musician about a friend of ours, how would he describe the band? And he goes, it's like sexy rock. And I was like, I'll take sexy rock. I was like, I'll take sexy rock. It's better than ugly rock. And that's how I look at it. So we're excited about the record coming out. And, both those, poetry and music are these immense loves of mine that doesn't matter how old I am, I'm going to keep doing it.
And I think it definitely, speaks to how we view our artistry. Maybe when we were younger, I don't know if it's different for you, is how you saw, how intense it was when you found these creative outlets. But also now when we're just a little bit more wiser, right? We want to continue doing it, but not in a way where, I think it was always a publishing thing. Like, I got to get out now. While maybe you thought, I'm still hot or I'm still good. But now it's like, no, I can continue doing this for the rest of my life. It's okay when I choose to release it,
Yeah, but I do think that with me, and it's funny because I've had this conversation with a couple of musicians that I know, especially this one poet / musician. He's like, his name is Mike Ladd, and he lives in Paris. I've known him forever. Like when we compare our creative outputs, I tell him I have this complex with music, which is what he has for writing, where we have to be extra critical about it, where it has to be perfect. And now I'm just like, no, I'm good. Like, granted, I don't want anything to be out of tune, but I go, no, it's cool. It's going to be different live anyway. But with poetry, I never had that. With poetry, I had this weird, like, punk ethic, like, oh, we're going to put this out. We're going to do this on tour. We're going to do this. Fantastic. With music, I'm like, I have to get this mastered. I have to get this mastered, and it has to have good artwork. And it's like, no, that kind of, and it's not really expectations, right? I think sometimes it's an anchor, right? Like, just put it out, like, but I also think being a musician and having musicians, especially if you're not the one that wants to do everything, because I think 100%, if it falls on one person, that's a very particular kind of person. That's, that's like Trent Reznor, that's Frank Zappa. Like these are these people who will spend their whole day doing that. But if you're trying to balance two different kind of platforms and two kind of mediums, well, you need someone else to do something. Yeah, and especially when I started just playing without a drummer, I was like, oh, it's cool. I would crack jokes about the computer dying. I go, oh, the drummer passed out again, And those things, you have to like really be accepting of it. I mean, granted, I wish I was 25 still and like doing this. Like I would have been really excited, but it's okay. It happens for a reason. Everything catches up, right? Technology, accessibility, musicianship, all those things are going to pace themselves at a particular pace. And when you get there, just know that you're there, and then push the envelope forward.
Right. I feel you. Putting it out, polishing it up, and presenting it to the public, right? So because of your unique experiences, as well as how you grew up, so can you kind of explain to us who can be a Nuyorican and what is a Nuyorican? And what is it about being a Nuyorican that, kind of defines your voice and your stance as an artist?
Who can be a Nuyorican is a definitely, I think, a more complicated question these days, depending. And I think because the roots of the term Nuyorican comes from like the generation of like the late 60s, early 70s. It basically means Nuyorican is basically New York, Puerto Rican. Like New York in Spanish is Nueva York, so it's a portmanteau combined of those three words, and it's great. Like it's one of those few words I ever got across. I was like, wow, this is a really good like combination of words. And but the older I've gotten, like I now I talk to people that Nuyorican is pretty much a school of art. Right? It's a school of art. It has language, it has art, it has music, theoretically. And, depending on who you ask, salsa is Nuyorican music because it started in New York. Right? And then you take whichever artist, I don't know theoretically if Basquiat will be considered a Nuyorican artist, But graffiti is Nuyorican art because of how it came out of New York, and there were so many Puerto Rican graffiti writers. So like those kind of things are things that I think have to be dived into. But like I was 17, yeah, when I went to the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, right? This space that was created by Puerto Rican poets in the Lower East Side of New York who was like, well, we want a space, right? And I think that's always what we strive for, right? Whether it's the Nuyorican Poets Cafe here or like some of the spaces in LA that were really good for open mics and things like that. Like those things are real important in development. I mean, the Nuyorican for the longest time when I grew up was one of the few underground hip hop spaces that we had in New York, and I saw everybody. I saw Mos Def, I saw Company Flow, I saw the Arsonist, I saw all these like poignant New York underground acts perform there.
Dope.
Right. I also saw Saul Williams. I saw Jessica Moore. I saw Bosia. First time I met Bo was at the Nuyorican. It wasn't like we were cool. It was like, oh, he's this Asian dude on stage. and these, like that space was so important because it really just lets you do whatever you want, depending on the night, right? Like one of the best moments was I had a feature there. It was for the third Saturday, which is called Words, and it was myself and We Be Foolish, which is do you remember Saya and Yeshua? Mm-hmm. When they put out the EP on Fondulum? So Yeshua Yesh had a side project called We Be Foolish, and Yesh hung out with us all the time. So basically, the whole crowd was this graph crew that I'm down with, and so I read this poem about graffiti, and like they know almost all the words. And I was like, that's cool, and I do this like instant, like this onomatopoeia in the middle of the piece where everyone's like, yeah, do the graffiti can noise. And it's like, all right, cool. So that space combined with the poetic history and the lineage of it makes me really proud to be a Nuyorican. But then when you talk to other Puerto Ricans from other cities, they kind of like change it. They'll say they're from like, Chicago Rican or Philly Rican. But I tell people, I go, you don't have to theoretically change it because again, it's not a cultural term anymore. To me, it's a school of art. The way the Beats had a New York school and a San Francisco school, the way the Dadaist has fractions in different cities, the way Surrealists had German and French. I go, it's complete like that, but it just has to be fleshed out more, right? And it has to be, I don't know if people are waiting for a book, but it's definitely something where it's like, I think it can be, and definitely like Puerto Ricans from the island can be that, because I think sometimes it's also it's like when you're rebelling against like your parents' culture, right? I think Nuyorican is really in that field of, if you think of how, if I was born in the early 70s, I know my mom would have been born before that. So she would have had this really kind of classic old fashioned way of looking at things. But if you're in New York in the 70s, that's funk, that's punk, that's early hip hop, that's disco, you're going to be completely different. The way I was completely different from my mom in the kind of music and art that I intook. So I feel like Puerto Ricans on the island can use that as a tool for like reinvention and expression, And shout out to Pedro Pietri and Miguel Agarin and Sana Maria Esteves and Miguel Piñero and Luis Reyes Rivera, like the original crew they were all amazing writers. And I had the privilege of meeting almost all of them, except Piñero, who had passed away beforehand. But Pedro Pietri is like one of my favorites. Like he was out there, bro. He was out there, And it's like, all right, cool. He said, hey, what's up? You're the young guy. I'm like, yep, I'm the young guy. He's like, cool. And so like now in that terms of where I'm not the young guy anymore, you pay it forward, right? You have all these like young cats who are like, your nephews and things like that. And, like I have that with a bunch of younger artists, and I appreciate that because it's that cycle that has to be there,
The mentorship is very important. I'm grateful for all the poetic mentors I had, including you, to look up to befriend, throughout the times you guys toured or went to slams. It's an amazing thing, the community of poets and creatives that, really share the work, and you really have to search for them or go to them when they're in town, but I'm glad that you're also mentoring a new generation, especially when we need those voices today. So when, I want to talk about your work a little bit, because when I'm reading your work, I find strength in your voice, is really coursing through the pages, you know, emanating from the way you describe concrete corners and even the slow film of sweat that's glistening off the surrounding bodies in your poems, whether it's people or the places. And there's always a magical element that, you know, takes us from that point of reality into an otherworldly at times. So especially when you're talking about, you know, New York or Puerto Rico, you know. So can you tell us more about how these two places have inspired you or haunted you throughout your writing?
Haunting is you know, your references of magical and haunting are really interesting. So I'll break it in terms of the books, right?
All right.
So Pelo Bueno was basically a brainchild of my boy Shaggy Flores, who is a poet from Massachusetts, and he lives in Virginia now, like Virginia, the DMV area. And he was a few years older than me, but we started basically like writing around the same time. But he understood the need and necessity to like take a hold of your your output, right? He didn't want to wait around for anybody. So he approached me. I was probably 25. Yeah, 24, 25. He approached me about it. He had the concept for the title of the book, and like he really like pushed it along. And it was cool because it gave me a certain sense of validation that I didn't necessarily need after that, right? And I'll tell you why that's important and later on. So that was like this early collection of work. I mean, you know, the earliest poem in there is probably the Creed of the Graffiti Writer, which was written like in '98 when I was a graffiti writer and a poet. And one of the reasons why I wrote the poem was I just got tired of people, you know, using graffiti as a metaphor. And I'm like, you do know that graffiti writers get punched in the face or get chased down the block, so they write on the wrong neighborhoods, right? Like people think it's all cute out here. I go, but I know dudes who jumped off train tracks, who got killed. I was like, you know, this is not an observer sport. You have to be ready for this. And so then I wrote that, and I still think it holds up. I did get one critique once from Tats Crew, who is this famous graffiti crew.
Yeah.
They go, "What about the highways?" I was like, "I don't drive, so I'm not bombing highways." But thanks, I appreciate that. So that was like this like really cool like introductory collection where I wasn't aware of what I wanted to present yet. So When the City Sleeps, when that book came out, When the City Sleeps was already getting worked on. And one of the things about When the City Sleeps, and I don't always talk about this, is that initially it was supposed to be based on multiple cities. Mm-hmm. It was going to be based on like, by the time that book came out, I went to Paris, I went to Cuba, I went to a bunch of, you know, like American cities, and I went to Puerto Rico. So I was like, okay, cool. Let me just do like a chapter for city. And then I was like, nah, you know, let's talk about New York, right? And for most people might think, oh, well, New Yorkers are always talking about New York. And I was like, yes and no, right? When you think about how long Puerto Ricans have been in New York, I don't know if anyone really realizes it's almost about 100 years. But people think like Puerto Ricans got there in like the 70s. I was like, no, like I'm, you know, like West Side Story is what it is. But we was like, but people were still there like say 40 years. Like Puerto Ricans started getting there like the late teens and early 20s, like 1920s, right? So we're talking about close to now almost already 100 years of solid migration back and forth. And I can tell you that I can probably name maybe less than 10 books of Puerto Ricans writing about New York. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write about it. So then when we talk about the magical element, what I really want to do is I want to talk about New York the way Spanish poets talk about Spain. How French poets talk about France, right? Old world countries, right? Like, what do you find behind the cracks? What's underneath? I go, but, you know, if you look at New York is a living organism that has changed over the last, 20, 30, 40, every 10 years, there's a building you love that's not even there anymore. So now there's just myth, right? So that's what I wanted to do with When the City Sleeps, and really give people like, look, it's not just old Dylan Thomas poems or, a random poem by Ginsberg, like, or even like, something that Baraka did. Like, this is like really integral, and really important for the development of every generation, how New York is with them. And granted, and I might be biased to think that I had the last great like generation that came out of New York because of what happened afterwards. And let it be gentrification, 9/11. It's a lot of things that the 90s was a very, look, I just wish I took more pictures, right? Like my boys have a lot of photos and I just, a friend of mine just sent me a photo of me and him, and this has to be 90, 95, 96. And when I tell you, D, that my hair was so big, and I was like, what was that kid doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, why is the hair so big? But I knew why, right? Like I was this young kid who was like, waist deep in like Black nationalism and socialism. I went to Cuba at 19. And when I came back, like I just had to balance everything, right? Being a Libra, you have to balance everything. And that was something that, like I think I found that balance, though not in my 20s, but in my 30s, I really figured that balance. I go, oh, okay, this is cool. So Renovatio, which is the Latin word for reinvention, even though I think the book was supposed to be called Reinvent Us, but I think Renovatio just sounded better. But the whole book is about reinvention, right? Like, how am I going to reinvent myself through this art form now that, here I am, a father, an artist, just, a working adult. Like, how do all these things, how do they describe themselves and how do they come out as art? So now, a little bit before When the City Sleeps, I remember someone told me they were a salsa dancer from Chicago. And they go, I don't really see you as Puerto Rican. I see you as a New Yorker. And at that point, I was like, well, I'm not going to take offense to that. One, because I love being a New Yorker, but because I also think that Puerto Rico has invested so much into New York that the very fabric of New York is very Black and very Puerto Rican and very Caribbean and very Asian, depending on the neighborhood you're in. And those things is what makes New York what it is. And so, I mean, it definitely changed, right? Because there's certain things about the concept of here and there, like, living here and then going back to the home country, that if you even have the ability to go to a home country, right, that you're always going to get judged differently. But then I was like, no, I'm cool. Like, I know it's like I would get random phone calls from people to go, hey, so Danny called me and he said that you would show me around New York because you're like this quintessential New Yorker. And I'll be like, okay, that's fine. Like, I wouldn't flinch. I'll be like, yeah, that's exactly what it is, just because of how I've cut my teeth all over New York City, right? So now with notes wasn't planned the way the other ones were. Thank you, Dan. It's really nice. The librarian people with books. This was 2014. I had just finished Renovatio. I think I had just came off tour, and a professor friend of mine had died of an aneurysm. It was really random, and it was really, really shocking. And he was like this really great scholar on like Nuyorican literature, and his name is Juan Flores, and like his partner Miriam Jimenez Roman just passed away this year. Like they were really like influential in pushing like Afro-Latino like literature in like academia. So I had him in mind. So one day I get a message from a professor in the University of Puerto Rico, and he's like, hey, we're doing a symposium for Juan. Could you come down and talk? And I go, oh, sure. So now this is why this point is important for me, right? Let me get this sun out the way somehow. There we go. This is why this is important for me. I have never read in Puerto Rico, right? I have never gone to Puerto Rico as an artist. I would just go as, hey, hi, I'm the guy from New York, big hair, poetry guy. Right? People know me, hey, what's up? But this is like, all right, look, we're going to fly you out. We're going to have you read. We're going to put you up here. I was like, okay, this is interesting. And they also asked Shaggy to go. So here's this dude who I've known for, I've known Shaggy for 20 plus years at least. And we're there and we're like, wow, this is intense for both of us, because we are getting asked by these English professors in Puerto Rico about Nuyorican culture and tradition. when we're never asked that by professors here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have actual graduate programs with the whole class on Nuyorican literature. Here they'll have it for like maybe a month. So we were like, okay, this is interesting. So then I started writing these poems, right? Here I am back in New York, back in PR, and it's like, okay, cool, you know, like, but then notes came out in June 2017. From April 2015 to say March 2017, I went to Puerto Rico about 9-10 times. And
Wow.
that kind of also solidified why I didn't go back to work. Like I was freelancing too much. Well, if I know I'm going to leave every 3 months, well, I can't really get a job like that. So it kind of also was like, okay, cool. If we're invested in this freelance life, let's do this. Let's give this 100%. Another shot. Like I think I did that probably in my early 20s. And so all these poems are coming out, all these new conversations. And here I'm talking to like these, you know, young 30-year-olds who are in like a PhD program in like linguistics or literature. And again, they're still talking to me about Nuyorican. I'm just like, you know, they don't do this. It's like going back to your Vietnamese, correct?
Yes, correct.
Right? It's like going back to Vietnam and they're like, hey, talk to us about Bay Area culture. And you're just like, yeah, but when I was here, when I was younger, you all called me like a gringo. You called me like this like white guy, right? And
yeah.
But I'm telling you, this is what it was, right? So it's like, so here I am, this kid who grew up kind of out the bubble of what, well, the term was I always thought I wasn't Puerto Rican enough for other Puerto Ricans because I didn't care much for salsa. I didn't dance salsa, and I'm in the back like, oh, can't you think they'll play some Pink Floyd for me? They're like, no, they're not gonna do that for you. I go, how about Zeppelin? And that has a little beat, and they're like, no, get out of here. So I get to New York, and they all watch anime. So I'm talking to them about anime, and the other professors are like, well, what are you guys talking about? Oh, we're talking about Jitsu, we're talking about Naruto, we're talking about spirit bombs, and they're looking at you like, what?
What?
I was like, well, one of the first things that happened is that the university on the west side of the island had a pop culture conference, and they're like, yo, can you be the keynote? And first of all, my whole keynote was about basically how anime and rock music completely changed how I was looking at things. But again, it's how is that young generation rebelling against the previous one that might feel old fashioned and might feel like they can see themselves in, you know, Itachi or, you know, Sasuke, and like, you know, everybody wants to be Sasuke. I'm like, nah, I'm cool. I don't want to lose an arm and look crazy. And so when Notes came out, yeah, I didn't think I was ever going to write a book like that. I thought I was going to write definitely a rock and roll book before anything else, you know, and it really allowed just me to feel, feel more Puerto Rican and be accepted in these really interesting circles that honestly 10 years ago, which I think was the last time that one of my professor friends said, oh yeah, we had these poets come out and they told me who it was. And it felt like the normal crew that I would think will get invited. And I was like, hey, what's up? I'm going to play guitar now and make all this noise and have a Kira in the background. And I'm just like, hey, you know, it is what it is. But, you know, there's still things, you know, like baseball and stuff like that, that I can connect with them on very like introductory levels. But it was really interesting that time period was, so last time I went to PR was last January 2019. And, you know, I was there for a month and I was like, okay, you know, let's not come here for a little bit. Let's come here when the record is out, because we did perform there, and that was really interesting too, being able to perform there with the band. And you know, but that book, I mean, I love that book. I think that book has some of my best work, but it was also, I was able to, you know, have my mom read it before she passed away. She had the whole section of her poems. She was able to read that, and she likes the poem about my sons too. She
And you know, that's something I want to really talk about with your book Notes on the Return of the Island. It's what I really enjoy, and thank you for bringing that, because it's as a person who has love and bittersweet disconnection to our ancestral homes. My connection to Vietnam has always been like that, as a writer as well. There's always a longing, though. In recent times, I've returned to Vietnam. The youth culture is totally different.
Yeah.
As I speak to the generation that currently is the new leaders or new voices, they love anime, they love Western street culture, they're rebelling definitely against what was previous, and they always want to know more. But as I'm not always the best mouthpiece, I can only share what I do know, right? Same as you.
Yeah.
And that's why I loved about your newest book, because it really speaks like a memoir about your times. And now knowing that you've been there a lot of times in between the
Yeah.
writing of this, that's a lot,
Yeah,
considering
it was. No, it was literally almost like 3 times a year for like 3 weeks at a time, and I'm just like, and they're like, here's your little apartment. I was like, look at this, because if you asked a kid 5 years before, I'm like, well, that's never gonna happen. I'm
right.
never gonna go to Puerto Rico, And but yeah, so it was really it was fruitful. It was fruitful and it was beneficial.
Yeah, my favorite pieces have been the ones where you took your son to the museum.
Yeah.
Also, the one that you spoke to your parents through the photography, your photograph.
Yeah.
Really the family pieces. As much as the ones where you're wandering and
Yeah, of
you're
course.
trying to catch a bus
Yo,
late at night.
that shit is so real, B. You missed the last bus. Once the last bus is out, you get an Uber, and those prices go up by $30. You're like, this is trash.
Yeah, that was a great poem that you were waiting for that bus, but you're speaking to the was it at a
Puerto Rico has the highest concentration of CVS's and Walgreens anywhere. It's ridiculous. Like it's yeah. So I was talking to CVS lady. There's one, I think it's on the corner of I think it's not it's by the major, no, it's right by across from the Walmart. So it's shit, what's that street? I know it's Fernandez Juncos and and Jose de Diego. That's the intersection right there. There's a CVS right there. Yeah, you missed that bus. You gotta walk. You gotta walk or pay a lot of money for Uber, or hope someone drives you.
That's the thing here. You're already mentioning that, just talking about that CVS, but Uber as well. And throughout your times of visiting, Puerto Rico and seeing the changes, it's funny because it's still in a way, sadly, a colony of America, right?
Of course, yeah.
And you're seeing all these, westernized industries come in, yet, as we've seen throughout the last few years, or even longer than that, not the people in the island nation have yet to be recognized as Americans. They're always the other, or seen as the other,
Yeah, it is a very complicated conversation because it's kind of, I've always said, and I think I say it in one of the poems, like it's divided, right? But it's divided so much more than just politics. It's generational divide, class divide, educational divide. And I tell people that if we're ever going to have someone that connects the whole island, they have to be able to speak to the professors and the campesinos and the farm workers in the middle of like the mountains that may not even speak English or have like a third grade education. Like they have to be able to connect them to see like, well, this is the benefits of us going independent, because we already know what's going on with us not being independent, being a colony of the country. And I think, until we get that, I don't know when, but it's been at least like 50 years before we had somebody like that.
I mean, definitely throughout the poems in this book, you connect those pieces, you question what's going on, but the beautiful thing is the way you weave the narrative. That's why I call it a memoir, because instead of fragmented pieces, and I think it speaks to some of your other books, you speak to a whole a people, a whole place, and you give it the richness it deserves. So I don't feel like I need to skip poems in the book. It reads from page to page to the end in a beautiful manner. Really suggest people go out and pick up that book as well as your other books.
So one last thing about notes, right? So the title of the book is influenced by the Amen Society notebooks to the return to the land, right? The very famous Negritude poet who had that epic piece. But the only reason I started, because that's what I was doing. I was writing notes, right? I was writing notes and everything. But
you got notes in the end, it's like.
So this is probably March probably March. And I'm in Puerto Rico I'm teaching a graduate class, and they have a takeover. The students take over the university. So the schools are closed. So everyone's looking at me like, so you can't teach your class. I was like, cool, I'm gonna go get a beer. I was like, I'll figure something out to do. So when I was having a beer, I was talking to two friends of mine who were PhD candidates. One was a linguist and the other one, I think, was just for English. So I was like, how do you guys feel about me putting a footnote section in this book? And they were like, you don't really see that for poetry. I was like, no, you don't. But you in fiction books, you see how beneficial it is because it adds a whole new thing. So that whole weekend is when I created that whole footnote section of 70 notes. And my favorite part was talking about the stuff that was really not Puerto Rican, right? Talking about bad brains and like in the section, like especially the music section. The music section, I was like, all right, let's see who get out of here. And it's like, but like for me, it's like, yeah, like these are kind of things you need to know because I'm always kind of referencing them. And but the footnote section is probably one of my favorite things too. And I think if I ever come out with newer editions of When the City Sleeps and Renovatio, I'm probably gonna do the same. I'll add them later on, but that's a tasking thing. That takes.
It is. I mean, it takes some time, but the beauty is that why you did that.
Yeah.
It helps for academic mind. They love
Of course.
context.
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
oh, I see. And
Yeah.
and students who are young or those who are readers of poetry, they want to know why you said certain things or where you've been. And
no, and it's like, and it's not really rigid like an MLA kind of like footnote.
Yeah.
It's like Stevie Wonder. I go, you should have Stevie Wonder in your music collection. What's wrong with you? Like, like this is nothing new. Like, are you crazy? He's like one of the goats. You don't have one Stevie Wonder record? Oh, I have that one song. Get out of here. And that's really like what I was trying to do, just like have another conversation with the footnotes.
It's all good. Schooling people, it doesn't always have to be offensive or bad for their health. Being schooled is healthy. So I know we did a lot of talking, so I was wondering if you would love to share some poetry with us.
Sure. I'm gonna share some poems, right?
All right, I'm gonna mute myself and let the camera concentrate on you, okay?
Okay, sure. Hi, everybody. Everyone's over here watching. So I'm gonna read a few pieces from probably a couple of the books. And I will start with, I'm gonna start with When the City Sleeps. And the very first poem in When the City Sleeps is actually the second poem, sorry. It's called Love Letter to the Bronx. And like any major city, I tell people that you should always write love letters to that city. Because I tell people, for the amount of folks and, quote unquote, like, old school folks I know in the Bay Area, I know in LA, I know in Chicago, I know in Boston, all of us kind of sound alike, right? We're all kind of disgruntled with the way the city has changed. So, this is as much for you as it is for me. Love Letter to the Bronx. I thank Luis Alois Grise for designing the Grand Concourse, the street that raised me alongside a rumbling D train and buses racing past, for 161st Street for filling me with dreams of center field and a stomach of hot dogs and french fries with the home run still vibrating off Yankee Stadium. The vendors will surely be back tomorrow at the same time and same place. The diner on the corner of Girard Avenue that stays open until 5 a.m. I don't think they ever really closed, but it used to be a hangout spot where my best friend Angel and I would go after we played pool. I always ordered heavy burgers that smelled like smoke. He always ordered eggs, thinking it's never too early or too late for breakfast. For Fordham Road, for her patience with our childhood, for going into Beach Street and buying vinyl with no intentions of ever becoming a DJ, for being strong enough to separate church and state when the preacher is yelling through the megaphone, the Navy is passing out recruitment flyers across the street, for your array of stores, big and small, that compete for my capital up and down this hill. This tradition of fast food and fast shopping has tainted the beauty of a hard-earned dollar. Since when has the beauty of a meal become so insignificant that it takes 5 minutes to devour? for the Bronx Zoo and Botanical Gardens for standing the test of time and showing the world that we could be a sanctuary of sacred things. You have cradled many memories on your free Wednesdays for children who have only seen animals on television. I am humbled by the facelift, the urine at the Kingsbridge train station. This may have a new look, but still the same neighborhood. It has Pole Park sheltering every vendor in the world, selling every kind of food possible. While the Raven looks on, the empty restaurant on the corner used to be a Empire Yao, a sandwich place, and a Twin Donut. It's still renovating itself. I'm still in love with the Lowest Paradise Theater on 188th Street, where my childhood is still sitting in her seats. Even after your renovation, your facade is still 1986 to me. Capture my imagination with your matinees. My memory is flawless when it comes to your stories. For Hunts Point, for fighting for our air and water, even though we may forget to acknowledge you and your efforts, you are beautiful. Parkchester and Castle Hill for having a wonderful array of beautiful women who ride the 6 train. And for those who don't know, ride uptown one day to experience it for yourself. It's breathtaking. For Skate Key on Allerton and White Plains Road for giving us a space on how we wanted to be, dress how we wanted to dress, and how to talk to girls the wrong way. I never really was there for skating, but I learned how to be out all hours of the night, break night, and go to class the next day. I love Franz Siegel Park, where my son and I pick branches, where he sees imaginary friends and I squint to see them to make sure I never get too old, where I lose touch with his childhood and invisible animals. For the Cross Bronx Expressway for allowing us to drive into the city, but I resent Robert Moses for parting these neighborhoods with dynamite just to get to Manhattan. There are beautiful houses I'll never see on Grand Avenue. For Co-op City for being this beautiful concrete paved into the sky in sections, your dedication to stay connected to the Bronx, even though you're so far east, it feels like Connecticut is an admirable one. My mother says, thank you for Bay Plaza, for Orchard Beach, for trying to be a beach, for the sand and grass on top of your concrete back, for your transplanted water from City Island and the Atlantic, trying to make you beautiful that even the fish smile sometimes, for Pelham Parkway and the tree-lined roads that hover above us when we drive by car, by bike, by bus. It's so fantastically beautiful. You might forget where you are because why would something this beautiful be in the Bronx? And I'm thankful for my mother who stayed here, raised on Willis Avenue, Alexander, and 138th Street through the 50s and 60s. Is not easy. For everything she went through, the deadbeat dads, the blackouts of 77 and 03, the World Trade Center, and a raising fare hike every other year. She could have taken us back to Puerto Rico, but she didn't. She's patient, strong, beautiful, creative, and adventurous, much like the Bronx. And I'm thankful for the streets of my youth, Jerome, Gun Hill, Westchester, Moshulu, West Farms, University, Van Cortlandt, Wakefield, Webster, Bedford Park, Tremont, and you, Grand Concourse. I love you the most. Thank you.
Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo!
Thank you. Yeah, you know, I mean, I like to give analogies. Like Fordham Road is that's basically Telegraph, you know. Not even Telegraph could theoretically be the concourse because it's a huge street, right? And it connects so many things. And, you know, if I'm talking to old Bay Area cats like, you know, Fantauzi, Khalil Fantauzi, Eli Fantauzi, you know, Saquon, like we just like, I get along with them regardless of our, you know, coast ties. We just sound exactly alike. Like, I remember when this was here. Or like, right, if we're talking about things that don't exist anymore, right? When you talk about Cow Palace with the Warriors, right? Or, you know, the fact that the Raiders aren't in debate no more. Sorry about that. I don't mean, or the fact that the Niners actually play in Santa Clara. It's cool. I get it. You know, it's those things that people who grow up now aren't going to have the same like conversations, right? Tango, the poet, the great Tango, Ison Martin, we talked about candlestick once, but he invited me down to Hunter's Point to teach a class somewhere. So I take the Muni and I go down to Hunter's Point. I get off and I go, you know, I find the place. He's like, yo, Blow, where you at? I was like, oh, I just got off the Muni. I'm walking around. He goes, you walking around? I was like, yeah. He goes, yo, let me go pick you up. I go, nah, it's cool. I got it. because it was still like kind of early. So when we drove by that intersection, there was like 50 people on the corner. I was like, oh, this is why you told me not to walk around here. Like, it's cute. I get it, you know, but those are things that when someone has been raised in a city, they have a different language. And I'm not saying that people from other cities can't move there, but I want those people, when they move to a new city, to have respect for the way that city has been made. They need to respect that. You know, it's like real simple. Like if someone moves to Oakland and it's like, you know, I don't know who hieroglyphics is. It's like, bro, you're in the wrong neighborhood. Like, you're supposed to know. You're supposed to be excited about Hiero Day. Like, this is something that you're like, yeah, let's go. Like, Digital Underground, who? You're like, I'm gonna strangle you. Get out my face. You know, and those things are real things. And I think that's the biggest problem with gentrification, is that people come here and they think because they pay what they want to pay, they have this weird sense of entitlement. It's like, no, bro. The people in the park play drums every Sunday. They've been doing that forever. Do you want me to read another poem?
Please do, brother.
Yeah. Okay, so this is off of When the City, off Notes, Return to the Island. Let's do one. Yeah, let's do this one, because I don't even think we've talked about him yet. So my son just started senior year of high school, right? This is amazing. I don't know how, because like I'm basically senior in high school. I don't even know how those things match. He's a senior in high school. He was born in Chicago, lived in New York, and now he lives in Michigan. So he's pretty much like this like Midwest kid, right? And you know, all I've tried to do in the last few years is just always be available and always try to be someone that he can be supportive. But they're teenagers, right? Like, it's like, I don't want to talk to my parents when I was a teenager. I was busy doing hood rat shit. You know, this is what it was. But I love to make him a protagonist in my poems. I love to mention him things, because for me, it feels like I'm slightly embarrassing him when he gets older, which is something I should do with my mom too. Right in there, make her cry, and that's it. So my son, his name is John Pablo Rojas, and this is called John Pablo Rojas is a Comet Crashing Out the Sky. And it's pretty much like among the dead flocks of birds shaped in V formation at Grand Army Plaza, atop of the weeds in the concrete, in the text messages in the South Bronx, beneath the streets, beneath Woodlawn Cemetery, beneath the pigeons, beneath the skyscraping towers of capitalism, he came crashing out the sky. Farther down, among forgotten demigods, formerly elected officials, and washed up rookie baseball players, staring into the black, beyond street and block, beyond bridge and river, beyond the borough and island, beyond religious purification, beyond cause and effect over genocide and gangbanging, corruption and city officials, consumption and consumerisms, underdeveloped communities, malnourished imaginations, corporate gentrification versus community salvation, next to safe deposit banks of safety, depending pockets of the poor, next to dilapidated condos of their tiny dreams, the trust-funded educations, the greed dripping from their mouths. Everyone is trying to leave their immortality in our mouths, inside a centrally parked cemetery in the middle of our skulls, among the activists with the blindfolds on, in the man-made cities in the skies with the man-made titles of world domination. They chop our hands off, they chop our heads off, and buy our body parts, think everything is for sale. In the packed streets of Times Square, in the rush hour traffic, in the corrupt police precincts, in the overcrowded jails, in the racist white American court system, with the organizers, the activists, the drummers, the poets, the painters, the dancers, the rioters, the musicians, the migration, the lawyers, the strap hangers, the running lost, the mothers of dead children, the orphan children, the wind from the Gulf of Mexico reminding us of the memory of South America. You'll see these images made of clouds. You see these ships with names of dead generals, and we're supposed to be happy when they say they come in peace and the ocean is dead still. And all that we carry is an empty briefcase for possibility. With our hearts, our fears, the stars, we count the planets, and the universe smiles at us. And we see the moon being master and servant. We see these sea serpents, we see 6 Black Hawks, and they all look like shadows. And then he crashed from the sky with nothing, no name, no breath, no voice, naked, hoping to come home to a better world and to a better me. And when he arrived, he was so beautiful.
Woo! That was my favorite, dude.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Carolyn, Marjorie, Regina, Sheila, Sydney. It's like romper room time. I see everybody.
Maybe one more.
Sure. No, of course not. See, that could be a whole day. But let's see, one more. Trying to figure out. Okay, cool. Okay, I'll read this one because we talked about the colonial status of Puerto Rico, and sometimes it has to constantly be talked about because, again, people think, everything is great. So el morro is basically a Spanish word for like castle, right? Or castillo, morro is this 15th century structure in Puerto Rico, which is basically like a tourist site. It was built by the Spanish in like 1540, and it's been everything possible: a jail, right? A castle, a defense site, and it basically was what the Spanish military stopped from invasions. Now it's a tourist site where you pay $5. You go in, you see a bunch of old things, and you take a picture on top of cannonballs. But it still has this weird mystique to it because it's so old, right? And if we're talking about hemispheres, it's easily one of like the 5 oldest things in this hemisphere, with like maybe like a church in DR and Brazil, and like some mountain in like Mexico that we don't know about. So this is called At the Top of El Morro. Today, we celebrate the death of the past that has haunted us since the very beginning. We mourn the living and wash our hands of all the names that tried to destroy us. The ventriloquist is on stage, and we don't care about a puppet government, politicians, governors, or presidents because we can see the strings. The laws they pass rhyme with eradication, annihilation, and extinction. It tastes like rotten apples. These money-grubbing bastards are so scared of being bankrupt, yet they owe billions to other countries and say we owe billions to them. They're delusional. Their heart is weak. Their vision of the future is bleak like an unnamed catastrophe that has scourged the island to a burnt-out cinder inhabited by the corpses of dead corporations. Our sky is shrouded by toxic dust particles. A gold coin is placed on our tongues. We hold oil in our cheeks. We light candles for the people who never come back from war. The puppet government wears wood dentures, poison the water we drink, chemically create the food that we eat, sharpen their silver spoons, pour wine into the skulls of dead monarchs, and they stand there, hideous and forsaken. Think of us as cattle, rattle, profit, loss, consumer. We are not here for the slaughter. We are not here for the slaughter. So when facing down the barrel of a gun, hope they're a bad shot. Hope they're not just following orders. Hope you look like their child. Hope they had an amazing day. Hope they realize you're not the person they're looking for. Hope they know this is not the old Wild West. Hope God intervenes, even though you're an atheist. Hope they love your luxurious hair. Hope you're not holding a wallet. Hope you're not holding a water pistol. Hope you don't have candy in your hand. Hope you don't get stopped at a traffic light. Hope they don't have fear on their breath. Hope they don't think you're a terrorist. Hope they don't think you're a communist. Hope they don't think you're an independentista. Hope they have some humanity left in their trigger finger. Hope they haven't been trained for this. Hope you wake up from this alive. At the top of El Morro, you can see these politicians walking around smelling like corruption and massacre. They hold bone marrow in their glasses, bow before their own skeletons, eat the bark of dead cherry trees, take a casual walk in a cemetery, crushing the bones of dead nationalistas. Their mouths full of declarations smell like vomit, carry blood in their pockets, brush their teeth with scalpels, watch the closed circuit destruction of Palestine, Chicago, Baltimore, and Vieques. They laugh with the death tolls. They eat their own feces to survive, sacrifice babies for immortality, destroy the dignity of the poor, paint their self-portraits with maggots, lay their bodies on dead goats waiting to be resurrected so when the stock market crashes again, they can sink their teeth into everything, everyone, and everywhere. At the top of El Morro, we wash our hands of their existence. We wash our hands of their name, and we walk into the ocean and bathe ourselves in freedom. Thank you.
Woo! Bonafide Rojas, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. My pleasure. It's great seeing you.
Man, and I always geek out because, not because I'm a writer myself, but and that I order poetry books for our library, but you know, the power of poetry. I always try to celebrate and tell people that the way poets, people who take these words, whether in any language, you know, assembling these letters together and their meaning, inflection, and power and weight, it's a beautiful thing because it really opens us up to the abstract, but brings, you know, even simple concepts to light in our minds. So thank you so much for blessing us this day and sharing your light with us, man.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
Everybody else out there, please pick up his books. They're on Grand Concourse Press, anywhere books are sold or resold, depending on where you find them. Definitely check out the Mona Passage, your band, as well as everything that's going on in your life through your websites. You want to leave us with a few words and shout outs?
Yeah. Right. The monapassage.bandcamp.com. Right. Support your children and their dreams. Black Lives Matter and Trans Lives Matter. And free Puerto Rico.
Free Puerto Rico. All right. Till we see each other again, my brother.
Yes, soon, Baba. You have a good day.
All right. Take care, everybody. Late.